Hey guys, we're ready for chapter 13, but before I start, I want you to think just a second and make a prediction. Where do you think Mullet Fingers has gone? He's left the hospital. Where do you think he is? All right, chapter 13. While Roy took a shower, his mother made a pot of spaghetti. He ate 3 helpings though the dinner gathering was as quiet as a chess match. Setting down his fork, Roy turned to his father. I guess it's the den, eh? That's correct. It had been years since Roy had gotten a spanking, and he doubted that he was in for one now. The den was where his father summoned him whenever there was serious explaining to be done. Tonight, Roy was so tired that he wasn't sure if anything he had to say would make sense. His father was waiting, seated behind the broad walnut desk. What have you got there? He asked Roy. A book. Yes, I can see it's a book. I was hoping for the particulars. Roy's father could be sarcastic when he thought he wasn't getting a full answer. Roy figured it came from years of interrogating shifty characters, gangsters or spies or whatever it was that his father was in the business of investigating. I'm assuming, he said to Roy, that the book will cast some light on tonight's strange events. Roy handed it across the desk. You and Mom got it for me for Christmas, 2 Christmases ago. I remember, his father said, scanning the cover. The Sibley Guide to Birds. Sure it wasn't for your birthday? I'm sure, Dad. Roy had put the book on his Christmas list after it had settled a friendly wager between him and his father. One afternoon they'd seen a large reddish-brown raptor swoop down and snatch a ground squirrel off a cattle range in the Gatlin River Valley. Roy's father had bet him a milkshake that the bird was a young bald eagle whose crown feathers hadn't yet turned white, but Roy said it was a fully grown golden eagle, more common on the dry prairies. Later, after visiting the Bozeman Library and consulting Sibley, Roy's father conceded that Roy had been right. Mr. Eberhardt held up the book and asked, What does this have to do with that nonsense at the hospital? Check out page 278, Roy said. I marked it for you. His father flipped the book open to that page. Burrowing owl, he read aloud from the text. Aphene canicularia. Long-legged and short-tailed with relatively long, narrow wings and flat head. Only small owl likely to be seen perched in the open daylight. His father peered quizzically at him over the top of the book. Is this connected to that science project you were supposedly working on this afternoon? There is no science project, Roy admitted. And the hamburger meat that your mother gave you? A snack for the owls. Continue, Mr. Eberhardt said. It's a long story, Dad. I've got nothing but time. All right, Roy said. In some ways, he thought wearily, a spanking might be easier. See, there's this boy, he began, about the same age as me. Roy told his father everything. Well, almost everything. He didn't mention that the snakes distributed by Beatrice Leap's stepbrother were highly poisonous, and that the boy had actually taped their mouths shut. Such details might have alarmed Mr. Eberhardt more than the petty acts of vandalism. Roy also chose not to reveal that Beatrice had nicknamed her stepbrother Mullet Fingers, just in case Roy's father felt legally obligated to report it to the police or file it away in some government computer bank. Otherwise, Roy told what he knew about the running boy. His father listened without interruption. Dad, he's really not a bad kid, Roy said when he finished. All he's trying to do is save the owls. Mr. Eberhardt remained silent for a few moments. He reopened the Sibley Guide and looked at the color drawing of the small birds. See, if the Mother Paula's people bulldoze that property, they'll bury all the dens, Roy said. His father put the book aside and looked at Roy fondly, though with a trace of sadness. Roy, they own the property. They can do pretty much whatever they please. But they probably got all the necessary paperwork and permits. They've got permits to bury owls? Roy asked in disbelief. The owls will fly away. They'll find new dens somewhere else. What if they've got babies? How will the baby birds fly away? Roy shot back angrily. How, Dad? I don't know, his father admitted. How would you and Mom like it, Roy pressed on, if a bunch of strangers showed up one day with bulldozers to flatten this house, and all they had to say was, "Don't worry, Mr. and Mrs. Eberhard, it's no big deal. Just pack up and move to another place." How would you feel about that? Roy's father stood up slowly, as if the weight of 100 bricks were on his shoulders. "Let's go for a walk," he said. It was a calm, cloudless night, and a pale sliver of moon peeked over the rooftops. Insects as thick as confetti swirled around the cowls of the streetlights. Toward the end of the block, 2 cats could be heard yowling at each other. Roy's father walked with his chin slightly downward, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "You're growing up fast," he remarked, catching Roy by surprise. "Dad, I'm the 3rd shortest kid in my homeroom. That's not what I mean." As they went along, Roy hopped from crack to crack on the sidewalk. They talked about comfortable topics, school, sports in school, until Roy nudged the conversation back toward the delicate subject of mullet fingers. He needed to know where his father stood. "You remember that day last summer we floated the Madison Canyon?" "Sure," said his father, "in inner tubes." "Right," Roy said. "And remember we counted 5 great horned owls in 1 cottonwood? 5. "Yes, I remember." "And you tried to take a picture, but the camera fell in the river?" "Not exactly. I dropped it in the river," Roy's father recalled sheepishly. "Hey, it was a cheapo disposable." "Yeah, but it would have been a great snapshot. 5 in the same tree." "Yeah," said Roy, "that was pretty amazing." The owl story did the trick. His father took the cue. "This boy you told me about, you really don't know his name?" "He won't tell me. Neither will Beatrice," Roy said. "That's the honest truth." "He didn't take his stepfather's last name?" "Leap?" "No, not according to Beatrice." "And you say he doesn't attend school?" Roy's spirits fell. It sounded as if his father intended to report Mullet Fingers for truancy. "What worries me," Mr. Eberhard said, "is the family situation. It doesn't sound too good." "No, it's not," Roy conceded. "That's why he doesn't live at home anymore." "Aren't there relatives who could take care of him?" "He feels safe where he is," Roy said. "You're sure about that?" "Dad, please don't turn him in. Please." "How can I, if I don't even know where to find him?" Roy's father gave him a wink. "But I'll tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to spend some time thinking seriously about all this. You should too." "Okay," said Roy. How could he possibly think of anything else? Even his battle with Dana Matherson seemed like a fuzzy, long-ago dream. "We better head home," his dad said. "It's getting late and you've had a long day." "A real long day," Roy agreed. But after he got in bed, he couldn't sleep. His body was exhausted, but his mind was wide awake, buzzing with the day's turbulence. He decided to do some reading and reached for a book titled A Land Remembered, which he had checked out from school. It was the story of a family who lived in Florida back in the 1850s when it was still a wilderness. Humans were scarce and the swamps and woods teemed with wildlife. Probably a pretty good time to be a burrowing owl, Roy mused. An hour later, he was half dozing when he heard a tap-tap on the bedroom door. It was his mother slipping in to say goodnight. She took the book from his hands and turned off the lamp on the nightstand. Then she sat down on the bed and asked how he was feeling. "Beat," Roy said. Gently, she snuggled the covers up to his neck. Even though it was way too warm, Roy didn't object. It was a mom thing. She couldn't help herself. "Honey," she said, "you know how much we love you." Uh-oh, Roy thought, here it comes. "But what you did at the hospital tonight, letting that other boy use your name to get in the emergency ward, it was my idea, Mom, not his. And I'm sure your heart was in the right place," she said, "but it was still a lie, technically speaking. Providing false information or whatever. It's a serious matter, honey." "I know. And it's just, well, your father and I don't want you to get in trouble, even for the sake of a friend." Roy raised himself up on one elbow. "He would have run away before he'd give his real name, and I couldn't let that happen. He was sick. He needed to see a doctor." "I understand. Believe me, I do." "They were asking him all kinds of nosy questions, Mom, and meanwhile he's about to keel over from the fever," Roy said. "Maybe what I did was wrong, but I'd do it all over again if I had to. I mean it." Roy expected a mild rebuke, but his mother only smiled. Smoothing the blanket with both hands, she said, Honey, sometimes you're going to be faced with situations where the line isn't clear between what's right and what's wrong. Your heart will tell you to do one thing, and your brain will tell you to do something different. In the end, all that's left is to look at both sides and go with your best judgment. Well, thought Roy, that's sort of what I did. This boy, his mother said, why wouldn't he give out his real name? And why did he run away from the hospital like that? Mullet Fingers had escaped through a window in the women's restroom next to the X-ray department. He left his torn green shirt dangling from the antenna of Officer David Delinco's patrol car, which was parked outside the emergency room. He probably ran, Roy said, because he was afraid somebody would call his mom. So she doesn't want him anymore. She'll have him locked up in the juvenile hall. What? His mom sent him off to military school, Roy explained, and now she doesn't want him back. She said so herself in front of Beatrice. Roy's mother cocked her head as if she wasn't sure that she'd heard him correctly. His mom doesn't want him? Roy saw something flash in her eyes. He wasn't certain if it was sorrow or anger or both. She doesn't want him? His mother repeated. Roy nodded somberly. Oh my, she said. The words came out so softly that Roy was startled. He heard pain in his mother's voice, and he felt bad for telling her that part of Mullet Finger's story. I'm sorry, Mom, Roy said. I love you. I love you too, honey. She kissed his cheek and tucked in the sheets one more time. As she was shutting his door, he saw her hesitate and turned back to look at him. We're proud of you, Roy. You need to know that. Your father and I are both extremely proud. Did Dad tell you about the owls? Yes, he told me. It's too bad. What should I do? What do you mean? Nothing, Roy said, sinking into his pillow. Good night, Mom. She'd already answered the question anyway. All he had to do was settle the argument between his heart and his brain.